Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author, Danielle Girard. The Killer Women Vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to the Killer Women podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with over 4 million listeners. I am your host today, Danielle Girard, a suspense author, and my guest is Sarah Bonger. Sarah lives in Sussex with her husband and very spoiled rescue dog. She's worked in finance and project management for the last 15 years, but the pandemic gave her the opportunity to revisit her teenage dream of writing. Her Perfect Twin is her debut novel, and she's brimming with ideas for more twisty psychological thrillers. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you for coming. And actually, I noticed over your shoulder there, we were talking about a moment ago, the cover, the UK cover. Show us that gorgeous thing.
So this is the UK paperback.
I love it. That's gorgeous. So tell our listeners a little bit about Her Perfect Twin.
So Her Perfect Twin tells the story of Megan, who discovers that her identical twin sister, Leah, is having an affair with her husband. So she goes to confront her sister. They have an argument, and it ends in murder. So now Megan has a dead body, and she starts to wonder, how might she get away with this? And the way she comes up with is basically to pretend to be both herself and her sister and live both their lives, because if no one realizes that Leah's dead, she can never be accused of her murder. And things aren't going too badly until lockdown hits and she is locked down at home with her husband. And it turns out he knows a little bit more than she thought he did about what she's been up to.
So tell us the inspiration for this story.
So it actually started out as a short story that was much more of a love story. And it was about a woman who was trying to decide if she should go on a second date with this guy, but he thought that she was her identical twin. And I wrote this and I was looking for something to kind of make it stand out, like kind of the sting in the tail. And a little voice in the back of my head went, well, maybe she killed her twin and that's why she's pretending to be her. And I just thought, well, that doesn't feel like a short story. That feels like a whole novel right there. And then a friend of mine during the very first lockdown, so for us in March of 2020, we'd been having a conversation about how horrible it would be to be trying to live a double life during lockdown. And I just thought, okay, yeah, that's interesting. That's the twist, or like the sting in the tail. Not that she's going to try and pretend to be her sister, but that there's going to be this huge kind of obstacle that's put in her way. And how can she possibly navigate that?
I can totally, having finished the book, which everyone else will have to go ahead and do that but I can see exactly those little pieces in the story. So this is your debut novel. Congratulations. That's super exciting. Tell us about the process. You know, was this the first full-length novel you've ever written?
No, I think like most authors, I have the novel that sits in a drawer somewhere. That's I suppose the kind of training novel. The one that I realized, because when you first sit down to try and write a story, I had no idea where to even start. Right. And so, yeah, for a few years, I worked on an entirely different story in a different genre as well. That was more kind of feminist dystopia, quite dark, but in a different way to thrillers.
Right.
And then kind of lockdown hit, and I suppose I didn't want to continue writing something that was that depressing, given the environment that we were in. So I started writing a lot more short stories, and doing a lot more reading, and reading for pleasure in a way that I hadn't been able to do prior to that, with work and everything else going on. And I'd taken redundancy, so I had quite a lot of time as well.
Right.
And then came up with the idea for Her Perfect Twin. Thought, it sounds kind of fun to write something. I mean, it is dark. It's about someone who commits a murder, but it has a little bit of black humor in there. It's fast moving. It's a fun book.
Yes.
And so I basically sat down. That was the September of that first year, so 2020.
Yeah.
We were in a weird position here in the UK where we were seeing case numbers rising again.
Yeah.
And we were talking, there was a lot of talk about kind of localized lockdown. And so different cities were having restrictions, but it was all a complete mess and no one knew what was happening. And
that was true everywhere a bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not alone in that. Okay.
But I think particularly in the UK, it was so weird because you'd have, so I live on the corner of East Sussex, West Sussex, Surrey, and Kent. And every county had a different rule. So I could literally walk kind of, 5 minutes down the road from my house and they'd have a different set of restrictions. It was all crazy.
Right.
But writing this I suppose just took me away from that. And I wrote it really fast, and please, no one hate me. It took me 14 weeks from start to subbing it to agents. But I didn't have a job, don't have kids. And there was nothing to do. Like, nothing was open. There was no socializing. There was nothing.
You don't have to excuse your success. We're very happy for you. That is, of course, a rarity. And even having just one book sort of in a drawer is also a rarity. I have 3 books that were, sort of buried in the backyard, as what I always say, before my first book came out. So I feel like, that is all really fabulous. So then, okay, so you found an agent. So this is your first agent, and she took it to, who is your UK publisher?
As my UK publisher is Hodder Studio, so they're part of Hodder and Stoughton.
Okay.
So to them, and we did a kind of deal with them that included the US publication, which is Grand Central. So it's all kind of within the Hachette company, but obviously different branches in different countries.
Yes. Well, that is huge. So congratulations. I like the idea. I want to go back for a second to your feminine dystopia, because there are some really, and I have a tendency to like tab little lines that I think are super funny. So I notice, and I appreciate, and since we're killer women, we can talk about all the sort of there's these little feminist zingers where, for instance, when it's like Megan's husband is a bit of and then this, she says, of a douche. That's not quite a dick, an idiot, controlling misogynist. I laugh with him, but I run each moniker against an image of my husband, his insistence that he have access to my online banking because women can be shit with money. It's that kind of stuff that, you recognize in the world, of course. And I just thought that was so, and who that speaker is, you have to read the book to learn, which is also a super, fun and interesting little tidbit that I'm not going to spoil. So what's so funny about this book and so interesting is that most thrillers we read, we're looking for who is the killer, right? That's the whole sort of, point of the book is like the sort of who done it, or the how done it. And we get this like right at the front of the book. And here's this woman who has murdered her sister. And so it's so, and yet there's a sort of, I don't want to say a levity, because I wouldn't exactly say that, but there's this sense that it all makes a lot of sense that she's done this. And I don't want to say too much more about that, because there's so many sort of like the sort of who, the what of the book. So was it a challenge? Well, it doesn't sound like it was 14 weeks. It was, did you ever have a moment where you're like, well, once we know who did it,
I think, so at the beginning, I didn't even think about the fact that I was basically trying to write a book where you you didn't just know who did it, you saw her do it. It happens in chapter 2. So people always say, like, is it a spoiler that she kills her sister? I was like, no, it's like literally right at the beginning.
Yes.
And yeah, so there's no ambiguity that, and you know why. So you kind of, you hear her. So she doesn't really mean to do it, but it's not like she hasn't threatened to kill her before. And it was only, I think I was about 30,000 words in, where I was walking the dog and I suddenly just had this thought of, oh, so I'm writing a book that basically it's not a how done it, a why done it, a who done it. It's a can she get away with it?
Yes.
And that was I suppose that was the moment that I realized that I was basically asking the reader to kind of root for the killer.
Right.
And I think I'm glad I had that realization quite far into writing. I think if I'd had that right from the beginning, I probably would have shied away from it a little bit more, and it wouldn't have felt quite so exciting, because new books are always great when you start sitting down and writing. I think that would have terrified me. But I basically just, I remember getting home and I went through my whole bookcase and I looked for all of the books where you root for someone who is the killer. So things like My Sister the Serial Killer, the Dexter books, My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing, those kind of novels, and went, okay, yeah, you can do this. It's fine. Right. And then I just kind of lent into it and just went with it, and went, if that's what the book is going to be, that's fine.
Right. And there is a sort of, and without spoiling anything, there's a shift of point of view. Which I think really, so when you think like, where are we going? You get this sort of whole new twist really about sort of what is actually happening, inside this relationship, this book, what's happening with these people. And as you said, early on, that the husband knows more about this than he lets on. So are you a pantser? Were you just like, how'd you do that?
So I'm a bit of both.
Yeah.
I think so. I tend to start with an idea, and then I think it's called the snowflake method, where you kind of expand it and expand it and expand it until you've got essentially a kind of overview of, or an outline of the plot, but not at a scene level, more around, these are I suppose the beats in the story. And once I've got that, I then just tend to start writing, and I guess kind of get to know my characters as I'm writing, and then give them a bit of freedom to go and do something a little bit off-piste, or maybe they turn out to not be quite the person that you thought they were. And yeah, and then I suppose I just kind of find my way until I hit, and then you get to a bit of a point where you go, okay, yeah, I'm not sure this makes sense anymore. And then I'll go back and plot it and get the post-it notes out. And in our bedroom, I have this huge blank wall that I cover in this stuff called magic whiteboard that basically converts the whole wall into a big whiteboard. That post-its stick to, and you can draw on it. And I'm sure my husband hates it because basically
sorry, honey, I'm sorry to turn the light on in the middle of the night, but I had an idea and I have to write it down.
Yeah, well, the worst thing then is when you end up with like weird plot points. So at one point, not with Her Perfect Twin, but with a different novel, I just had how can she kill her husband and make it look like an accident, just written in huge letters on this wall. And he walked into the bedroom one night and he's like, do I need to worry? I was like, no,
right,
it's plot. I'm plotting, it's fine.
Yes, I think these, and did you know you wanted to be a writer when you got married?
No, this was kind of a bit new. Like, I'd been looking, because I was in finance, which is obviously one of the least creative jobs you can do, or is encouraged to be.
10 years in finance right here, so I get it.
Right. And maybe there's something in there then that because I know a few finance people who become writers. But yeah, I was definitely looking for something that would give me that kind of creativity, and that, I suppose, that just ability to go and just create something entirely new, just from my imagination. And yeah, writing, guess just was that. And that was probably a year or so after we got married. So he married an accountant, but he's got a thriller writer.
That's my husband too. He married, actually, I was applying to med school. So he's married, like, we've been married almost 30 years, but he's been married to a lot of different people. And I think it was a shock. He was like, I kind of thought you were going to be like a doctor. I'm like, sorry. Well, so I do think there's something about finance. Do you use Excel? I always feel like isn't that funny? Like I love your point of view and the sort of snippet, and I use that all the time. So, but actually I've not heard of the snowflake method. And I feel like I've talked to, so I want to hear more about that. Like,
yeah, so it starts with literally a kind of like an idea or a pitch line or essentially the hook of the book. And you start with that and then you build it out. So you start with one sentence and then you build that into a paragraph and then you build that into a page. And I found that really, really helpful because I knew that it was a story about a woman who kills her sister.
Right.
I knew that bit, but I didn't know any of the rest of it. And it was really, really helpful to kind of bring that story out of that single scenario, but keeping that hook right at the center of what I was writing all the time.
So interesting. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that you sort of grow it organically, right? In every direction and then morph it into, so once you had finished your draft, did you have a beta reader? Do you have somebody who read it, or you basically just submitted it?
Well, I probably did something that is a bit of an odd thing to do. So I'd taken redundancy from my company, and we were a kind of team of predominantly project managers, but mainly with a kind of finance bent to it. And we'd always been quite a close-knit team. And so we were kept having these monthly Zoom meetings through lockdown as a kind of, just general support. And we'd all just go on and have a few drinks and catch up. And everyone else in my team who'd gone their separate ways, they'd all found new jobs. And it kind of got to the end and everyone looked at me and went, and so Sarah, what are you doing?
Yes.
And I was like, I wrote a book. And I'd not really talked that much about writing beforehand. And they all went, well, send it over. And I thought, okay. And particularly my previous boss, we'd worked together for 6 years. She knew me really, really well. She'd previously been, the one giving me feedback on performance anyway. So I knew she'd be honest about what she thought. And I also knew that if she thought it was terrible, she would say to me, Sarah, go and get a proper job. and she didn't. She wrote back to me a couple of days later. She said, I've read it. I love it. Keep going. Tell us how we can support. And so about 10 of them read it, came back with everything from this character's name changes partway through to to I have no idea what's happening in this chapter. So I used all of their feedback, and they're not writers. They are readers, but they're not writers. But actually, that just knowing that feedback was brutally honest was really, really helpful. And so I made some changes, and then at that point I then started to submit it.
That's amazing. So are they on the hook? Like, you're like, okay guys, my next book's coming. A
few of them are, yes. And I do run ideas past a couple of them because they're great at logic checking as well, because they kind of have those mindsets as well.
Right.
Of could this, logically A to B to C to D actually happen? They're really useful for that as well.
Right. That's right. It's super. I mean, you need to have a community, and it's great that you found it. And actually, there's something is really fresh about it, a perspective that doesn't come from writers too, right?
Yeah.
Because we get sort of sucked into other stuff about, because we know so much about the market that it's like, I don't know if you can pull this off, or if this is going to sell, or versus somebody who's just like, this is a good story, and that is at the very sort of heart of it. That's what really matters, right?
It is super helpful to have that perspective. And then I have a writing group now as well, who are much more who are much more helpful in terms of, I suppose, the mechanics and the kind of
Yes.
narrative structure, and do you realize you've changed tense at this point, and those kind of things that I think non-writers don't realize.
Right.
So that's super helpful, and obviously always great to have other people who are involved in the industry who understand the ins and outs. But just for that initial, like, is this the kind of book you'd want to read?
Right.
It's
That was
great to
great.
have an external perspective.
So I feel like I have to ask if you have a sister and if we should be worried about her.
I do not have
Don't choke on your tea.
So the running joke in the family has become, I don't have a twin anymore. But that sounds really, really macabre. So
dark.
So no, I don't have a twin. I've never been a twin. I have an older brother, but he's safe because I definitely couldn't pull off.
That's right. You cannot be him. And there's something so clever about this twin, this about Megan, that she's like, when she decides to go to Vegas, which I think is a whole nother sort of fabulous, you got to read it to understand where that's coming from. I love that she's like, well, even if they use, retinal scans and fingerprint things, that, they will of course assume that the error is on their end, rather than it being that, before they think I'm a killer posing as my identical twin sister. And you say Occam's razor in action. I thought that was so great because it's so true, right? I mean, and there's all this extra layers of security, but really, like, it also messes up. It's also wrong sometimes. And so when you're faced as a person at TSA or wherever you'd be faced with somebody who looks like her identification, but something's not working, you just assume it was your machine. So there's really very few people that can pull that off. So I also love the fact that you have the parents mark the twins, and then when they're born, which I have actually heard of parents who have done that. Right? They have to. So what they do?
That came from a real article, I think, that I read of this dad who did just tattooed his babies because he didn't know which one was which, and then the mum was like, nail varnish maybe, or something less permanent. Although someone has subsequently said to me that you would never put nail varnish on a baby.
Oh.
I didn't know that.
So, but I think, but Sharpie marker doesn't seem like that super safe either. But, but I guess, if it's just a matter of like 1 dot, 2 dots, and there's a little bit of, there's a bunch of things that work in her favor. And I love the way that it's sort of all, anyway, we cannot talk about all the great stuff because, people have to read it. So, that's so clever. Okay, so this book came out, is it just coming out here or is it just coming out everywhere?
So it was out in the UK in January.
Okay.
So it's been out here for about 8 months.
Yes.
And then, in the US, 2 weeks. So
yes.
2 weeks today it's out. So
exciting.
Yes,
and we're going to actually bring this, we're going to go air on that day. So today is the day that her perfect twin, when you're listening to this, is available in the United States. And I do love this cover. And if you go to my Instagram or Facebook, you'll see that I did my own book face, which I think is so fun. I love a book with a cover, and she's much younger than I am, but I did my best to sort of pull.
You are also the first person to do it as well on social media.
I am?
Yes.
Woo!
You are.
I'm winning. I'm winning something. I love it. Okay, so tell us now that's been out. So what is next? What you've got? What are you working on?
So the second book, which is called Her Sweet Revenge, I've just sent it to copy edits literally last week. So that is pretty much done, and that will be out in the UK in April next year, and then I'm assuming in the US. I don't have a confirmed date, but it will be kind of similar to this time next year.
Okay, so they're trying to, I like when they try to bring them out a little closer, so that we don't feel like, wait, why are we, why did we get it in January? It's so, that's so rude, but it makes total sense. I love the way you say literally. I kind of want to I almost want it to be my ringtone because the British accent's so fun. And I'm so sorry about the Queen.
Yeah, very sad news.
I mean, she was 96.
Yeah.
So it's, I think, and I like that she's with Philip again, but how does it feel over there? Like that's such a different, we have none of that, so we don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd because I mean, it's never, it's never happened in pretty much anyone's lifetime, to
Right.
be fair now. So and obviously never on a scale with this much visibility and coverage. So yeah, you turn on the TV onto any of our kind of domestic channels and it's just rolling news. But obviously, I mean, there isn't a lot to say
Right.
now.
Right.
And yeah, a lot of things have shut down and
Interesting.
yeah, it's a slightly odd time because it feels a little, that time between Christmas and New Year
Yeah.
where like things aren't quite normal. It's a bit like that in a way.
Interesting.
Um, yeah.
Because people are taking the time to sort of, they're shutting the country down in honor of the Queen. The closest would be like when Princess Di died.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, that was 25
At
years
least, yeah,
ago.
right. A long, long
Yeah, I
time.
mean, I was a teenager, but that was before we had the internet and before you could go on Twitter and it's British Twitter is just a very, very bizarre mix of people saying very nice things, people saying not so nice things. Yeah, it's all a bit of it was an odd time.
Yes,
So
it's so
yes.
interesting. God, a woman who, 70 years, that is just, yeah, that is, anyways, it feels like a very sort of momentous time to be there. And, and what an incredible lady. I mean, just watching her, I can't even imagine what it's a bizarre structure for us, right? Of course, we don't have anything like that. But just the way, from everything I saw and read, the way she handled herself was really fantastic. And, and hopefully Charles will, you know, lead on in a similar way. Although it's strange to think he's already 70 something, right? So
Yeah.
so she lived for such a long time and had such a strong presence. So anyway, but I do feel like that's an interesting thing that you guys are going through that we don't have an experience. Not that it has anything to do with, she's not killed by her twin sister. So that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so Her Sweet Revenge coming 2023.
Yeah.
And tell folks where they can find you. What's your website? What are your social media handles? What social media do you, I know not everyone loves social media at all or all of it. Where's the best place for people to sort of find out when things are happening with you?
So best place is either Twitter or Instagram. Yeah, don't try Facebook because I do not understand how it works. I've just about managed to get my head around Twitter over the last couple of years, and Instagram. Instagram has a lot of dog pictures on as well, though. So
You're a
she's
big
very
dog
cute.
fan.
Yeah.
I see the dog walk by.
No,
Okay.
luckily. Because she does have a tendency, if I'm chatting, she'll just kind of come in and
Sure.
muscle in.
Yes.
But yeah, no, she's downstairs, hopefully behaving.
Hopefully behaving.
Hopefully.
Okay, and so on
But
Instagram, what's your tag?
I am Sarah Bonner 101 on both Instagram and Twitter. So
Fantastic.
yeah.
And you have a website as well, Sarah?
I do not. Yeah, only, well, I keep thinking probably do need to get one of those, and everyone said to me like, oh, when you've got 2 books, yes, but
Yeah. Okay.
so I'm just
but we can find you at the bookstore, indie bookstores, Amazon, everywhere. And this book will be available today. And it is, I did read it, and I always do this where I'm like, oh, I'll just read a few chapters before bed. So I started at 9:30, and then at 11:30, I'm like, you got to go to bed. So I read it in 2 days, but had I started it earlier in the day, I think I would have finished it that first day. It was, and I even told, I made the mistake or whether it's a mistake of really like being like, sure, I can fit one more Killer Women into my schedule. It's been a little bizarre. Now we're supposed to do one a week, and now sometimes we're doing 2 a week, which is why yours is coming out on a Tuesday. But I'm like, I'll just read 20 or 30 pages, and if I just can't I feel like I can't fit it in, I won't fit it in, and then I get in there, I'm like, oh damn it, it's another one I'm gonna love. I gotta fit it in. I gotta talk to Sarah. So it is a really fun book, and some really sort of wickedly fun moments, and a very satisfying ending. I really appreciate that too, which I think is really impressive, especially since, well, we won't even talk about it's your second ever full-length book, 14 weeks, all these reasons, but also because I do think, like, you started, it's not a sort of traditional style suspense or thriller, with the fact that we know immediately who did it, how she did it, when she did it. We watched her do it. So congratulations. It's
Thank
super
you.
exciting. I look forward to the next one. And I'm really glad you could be here today to talk about it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. So
cheers to this. Woo! Okay, this has been Killer Women with Sarah Bonner and your host, Danielle Girard. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.